New Orleans Saints edge rushers might finally be ready to make plays at the quarterback. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? I am your host, your friend, Ross Jackson, New Orleans native, your New Orleans Saints expert and credentialed member of the media covering those New Orleans Saints as a Saints beat writer over at LouisianaSports.net. And on today's episode of Locked On Saints, the Saints put out their unofficial depth chart. We'll take a look at some of the newcomers on defense that are already claiming their starting roles. We'll dive in to guys like Kendre Miller and Clyde Edwards-Helaire who have a major opportunity ahead of them. But before we turn the page to what's on the way, let's wrap up what has happened and finish reacting to training camp as a whole with 5 standout players that I think are winners from this year's training camp, starting off with an edge rusher that could help to finally buoy the depth of the position. We got all that coming up for you on today's show. We appreciate you very much, whether it's your first time or your next time, being here with us this time, making us your first listen, and being an everydayer here on the show, which is a proud part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, you can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Just head over to FanDuel.com to get started. The New Orleans Saints edge rusher group has looked pretty promising here so far throughout training camp, and it's not just the top guys, Chase Young, Cam Jordan, Carl Granderson. There's been a couple of guys that are maybe towards the quote-unquote bottom of the depth chart that have kind of pushed their way up, and I do think that that's something that's worth discussing when it comes to the winners. And so I want to start off with my first winner, and that is Chris Rumph. Chris Rumph, the second, coming in as somebody that is familiar with Brandon Staley for certain, and certainly that has had an impact for him. But he is somebody that I mentioned early on as a consistent guy that flashed a bunch, but we wanted to see him turn that into consistent production. And I think as we got all the way down to day 11 and we saw him in one of the earliest drills in that practice day, get out there and then put pressure on the quarterback, potentially get a sack, right? It's all non-contact. We're not actually seeing these guys hit the quarterbacks or anything like that, even when they do go live in full contact. But he has just been so consistent. And I'll rope in, of course, Jasheen Davis in here as well, the Wake Forest undrafted free agent rookie who's looked really good. Cam Jordan called him a speed demon off the edge. And so both of these players, but in particular Chris Rumph, who comes in as somebody that, was with Brandon Staley, a part of one of his draft classes with the Los Angeles Chargers, hit the free agency market, was looking for a new place to land, landed with the Saints, and so far has made good on it. So he's been somebody that's been very impressive so far. Let's see if he can carry that impressiveness into production in the preseason and then bridge the gap into the regular season. Speaking of somebody that's got to take training camp sort of stud titles and training camp momentum and carry it into the regular season, I want to go to winner number 2 over on the offensive side, wide receiver Mason Tipton. For the second training camp in a row, he's looked really, really good. And so I'm calling him a winner because he didn't get an opportunity when he was hampered with that injury last year to ever hit the field during the preseason last season, and he still made the roster. Now he's going to have an opportunity to hit the field during the preseason and try to earn that larger role and show that he can have a greater level of impact. And the other piece of good news for Mason Tipton is that he's done a really good job developing kind of chemistry, not just with Spencer Rattler, but also with Tyler Shuck. And so you've seen these guys have a little bit of a connection, and that's great news for Mason Tipton, who's looking again to bridge that training camp reputation into the regular season, be a more consistent contributor behind guys like Chris Olave, Rashid Shaheed, as well as Brandon Cooks. Rashid Shaheed could very well be a winner on this list as well. I think he's poised for stardom. He's bulked up. He's ready to go. He's going to be utilized in more areas of the field. He's still going to be contributing on special teams. I think there's a lot of good things that you'll see from Rashid Shaheed, but Mason Tipton did exactly what he needed to do this training camp, making him a winner of training camp. Now let's see if he can turn it into winning during the preseason and finding his wins where he can get them during the regular season. Let's go to a newcomer much like Chris Rumph, on the defensive line that ends up just immediately eating up a starting role. And we're going to kind of deep dive into this in a little bit, but I have to shout out amongst my winners, Davon Godchaux. This guy has come in and he showed up and he showed up. You know what I mean? Like, he got here or to New Orleans. I'm actually in California now, but getting ready for, Saints camp as it moves over here to the West Coast. But, Davon Godchaux was traded for, so you knew he was going to have a pretty solid role no matter what, but he is leaping his way into being a consistent piece of this defense. We'll discuss that a little bit more later. Safety Julian Blackmon did the same thing, giving him a little bit of a winner nod here as well. He's another newcomer that has really impressed immediately. He's made plays on the football, gotten interceptions. He communicates extremely well, flies all around the field, and ends up kind of making some, plays here and there and everything. I think that he, coming in, kind of leaping Jonas Sanker, who this draft class drafted, or who this coaching staff drafted, leaping Jordan Howden, who's been in the building for multiple years. It just goes to show you how much, the veteran experience matters, but also just how much, Brandon Staley's always wanted to work with this guy. He wanted to draft him back in 2020, but the Indianapolis Colts took him. And then so Brandon Staley drafted Terrell Burgess later on in that first round, and now, or later on in that third round, and now in New Orleans, he's got both Terrell Burgess and Julian Blackmon, but Julian Blackmon so far has really leapt into a big role there as well. And then my last player that I want to highlight, and then I'm going to get to a little bit of lanyap here, but my last player that I want to highlight is obvious, I think. He feels like the biggest winner of training camp, and that is kicker Blake Grupe. This guy was supposed to be in a training camp competition, remember that? And this has never looked like a competition for him. He's never looked like he's been in a competition, and he has never allowed any level of competition to even catch up to him. He's 26 of 27 when it comes to field goals that he's kicked so far throughout training camp, with his one miss being one that happened in this weird downpour that happened out of nowhere. And his competition, Charlie Smith, is just 16 of 27. And so you have no contest in between these two. This is Blake Grupe's job until the cows come home. And really, honestly, if he kind of keeps this composure and maintains sort of the equanimity that he's found going into here in the training camps, going into the regular season, he could be in for a very, very big year. All right, a little bit of lanyap for you on this. A sixth winner, and it's Kellen Moore. I've talked about this a bunch. I think that Kellen Moore has done a phenomenal job. I love what it is that he has done with this team so far, whether it comes to making sure that they get the opportunity to recover after practices, going live in practices in terms of game calls and things like that, doing those sort of call it periods as opposed to the scripted periods, allowing his players to play football, his connection with the staff. He's doing interviews and everything like that. Like, he is just really, really doing a good job leaning into the community, leaning into the opportunity that he has in New Orleans to really change the culture and really change the vibes. And I think he has done an excellent, excellent, excellent job of that so far. Kellen Moore, stamp of approval, winner of the training camp period. All right, coming up next, let's take a look at the unofficial depth chart, and we'll start off over on the offensive side where a pair of running backs have a major opportunity ahead of them. We got that coming up for you next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This episode is presented by Yahoo Fantasy. Everyone is playing over at Yahoo Fantasy. The NFL season is here, and that means that fantasy football is back in full swing. Everybody's over here at Yahoo Fantasy. You should be too, whether you're a first-timer or you're a veteran making your millionth league. And to celebrate 28 years of fantasy football greatness, Yahoo Fantasy is dropping 28 new features, big new features, over 28 days throughout August. To kick it off, they just dropped the Yahoo Fantasy Guillotine Leagues, a killer new way to play fantasy football over on Yahoo, which takes the lowest scoring team and they get eliminated each week until there's only one highest scoring team left. With the season right around the corner, now's a great time to get your friends together, get your league together, and give this new mode a try. If you're more into the classics, you can still play head-to-head private leagues or in a public league as well. So stay tuned for more killer announcements and start playing Yahoo Fantasy Football now at yahoofantasy.com/LockedOnNFL. All right, family, a pair of running backs, Kendre Miller and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, have a big time opportunity ahead of them as they top the unofficial depth chart along with Cam Akers behind Alvin Kamara going into the first preseason game. Now, we know we're not going to see Alvin Kamara. Kellen Moore told us that during his post-practice availability on Tuesday. And so when we look at who the players are that are going to be out there, we know no Devin Neal. He's going to be out with a hamstring injury for a couple of weeks. And so this opens the door for guys like Kendre Miller, Clyde Edwards-Helaire in particular, but also a couple of newcomers and guys like Cam Akers and Marcus Yarns as well. But my big focus is going to be on Kendre Miller and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. They are the quintessential between the tackles runner types. They also have pretty good pass blocking ability as well, which, look, no block, no rock, right? If you're on the field, or if you're blocking, you're on the field. If you're on the field, you get the ball. That's the way that this works. And I think that both of these guys kind of have a charge in their own way to make it work with this team right now. Kendre Miller has been working hard for the past 2 years to just try to stay on a football field. Now he has made it through kind of that first opening stretch of training camp. Got to make it through here in California as well. Remember, California, Irvine, first practice last year, hamstring injury, and we didn't see him until, he got off an injured reserve at the beginning of the season last year in the regular season, missing all of training camp and the preseason. Now he has an opportunity ahead of him to go up against the Los Angeles Chargers this weekend, probably be the first running back on the field. We'll see how that works out, and be able to kind of show everybody, hey, here's what it is that I can do. Here's what it is that I can provide. Here's what it is that I can bring to this team. And he's got a charge to do that. He wants to prove that he can stay on a football field. He wants to prove that he can be a contributor. He wants to prove that he can be that dynamic, explosive back that he was at TCU, and then some in this Kellen Moore offense. Now becomes this opportunity, especially with no Alvin Kamara during the preseason, or at least in the first preseason game, and then no Devin Neal for at least a couple of weeks, which could mean 2 preseason games. Real big opportunity ahead for Kendre Miller, who has the charge to get it done with this team to prove that he can be the player that he knows that he is. On the other hand, Clyde Edwards-Helaire has something to prove, but in an entirely different way. It's not necessarily that he has anything to prove. It's that this is a dream come true for him. This is a guy that signed with the Saints last year in week 16, and then ended up having to wait until week 17 and 18 to play his first games of the entire 2024 season. He told me after that game in an exclusive that we did over at LouisianaSports.net that he was that being out there and having Edwards-Helaire on the back of his jersey, number 23 in that New Orleans Saints jersey, was a dream come true. I asked him again on Tuesday, hey, it was a dream come true for you then. What was it like when you got the phone call to come back and sign with the team again? He told the story about being there, having dinner with his wife, seeing the 504 number come across. He said that he got the phone call, got his bag packed, got on a flight out of Kansas City at 11:30 p.m. that same night, got to New Orleans, was at the facility and done to get a physical done, was done with his physical by 8 a.m. and was in team meetings by 9 a.m. the next day. That is a dude that was very, very excited to be a part of the New Orleans Saints. He also said that he had heard from the Detroit Lions as well as the Kansas City Chiefs at varying times, but he knew where he wanted to be. He wanted to be back in New Orleans. So this is a major opportunity for him to prove that as well in an offense that, again, with Kellen Moore, much like Kendre Miller, supports what it is that he does well as a between the tackles downhill type of runner. All right. The quarterbacks on the unofficial depth chart are basically exactly what we thought. It's Spencer Rattler or Tyler Shough or Jake Haener. I kind of broke this down in yesterday's live show, but I know not everybody's able to catch every show. So let me quickly reiterate. The thing that's so interesting about this is not that it's or. We knew that that was going to be the case. The thing that's really interesting about this is the order in which it's in. Typically, when you see things like this, they're put into sort of an experience order, right? Seniority. That's not the case here. It's Spencer Rattler first, who's got 2 years of NFL experience. Tyler Shough second, who's got 0 years of NFL experience. And then Jake Haener third, who's got 3 years of NFL experience. So I think that this further pushes the narrative here that Spencer Rattler is ahead in this quarterback battle, and that Spencer Rattler and Tyler Shough are the real competitors now in this quarterback battle. I think we're going to start to see this thing kind of narrow down to those two a little bit more. I think we've already seen it. Spencer Rattler went 2 consecutive days with the first team, Tyler Shuck went 2 consecutive days with the second team, and now you're seeing Jay Kendre consistently with the third team. I think we're seeing this kind of pattern begin to grow. Outside of that, when it comes to the offense, nothing super shocking on the unofficial depth chart. And we should remember, and I will remind us all, including myself, that this is unofficial. So what's on this unofficial depth chart doesn't necessarily mean anything. In fact, it's already out of date because or it's not that it doesn't mean anything, but it doesn't always mean what it said, what it might look like it means, I think. And that's why we mine at it and pick away some stuff. But in fact, it's already out of date. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5th tight end on the roster here was Seth Green. Seth Green's already been released. He struggled big time throughout camp when he dropped that touchdown by Tyler Shuck at the end of the scrimmage or near the end of the scrimmage. That kind of felt like the writing was on the walls. He was back on Tuesday, had a couple of, things that didn't necessarily go his way on Tuesday as well. And so the Saints parting ways with him. They go and they sign Mason Klein, who played basketball, or Mason Pline, who played basketball at Ferris State, played tight end / fullback during his time over at Furman College, where he caught 32 passes and 4 touchdown receptions, 290 something yards during that time. He's 6'7", 260 pounds. He had joined the San Francisco 49ers last year as an undrafted free agent, spent 15 weeks on their practice squad, got waived, and now he's on his way to Irvine to join up with the New Orleans Saints. So the Saints swap out one tight end for another one. But outside of that, like, the offensive line is exactly what we expected. Kelvin Banks Jr. at left tackle, Trevor Penning at left guard. So nothing to be hidden there. Taliese Fuaga at right tackle. No big surprise there. We already know Cesar Ruiz, Eric McCoy, left guard as well. Right guard as well as center, respectively. And then not too much shuffling going on with the reserves either. Everybody's just kind of in seniority order. And so nothing super surprising left there. So I think that what this tells us is that kind of the offensive depth chart, and I think we knew this going in, but the offensive depth chart is unlikely to see many more shakeups as compared to the defensive depth chart, where there was just simply more new talent added, right? Like, the Saints over on the offensive side brought in a lot of rookies, but a lot of these rookies are also undrafted rookies. Torricelli Simpkins, Chris Tyree, Moochie Dixon, Marcus Yarns, Jonathan Mendoza. Like, really, the offensive new additions include guys like Marcus Yarns, Devin Neal, right? A lot of draft picks. Tyler Shuck. It's really just a lot of draft picks. And then, Kelvin Banks Jr., who is, your immediate impact guy at left tackle. And then Brandon Cooks fitting in at one of those 3 top wide receiver spots. But I think the big opportunity here that lies for maybe some changing in the depth charts really comes down to that quarterback position, and then maybe shuffling in with some of the depth. But it's a very different story over on the defensive side, where we have seen several newcomers already jump into starting roles. Let's dive into the defensive side of the depth chart next as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode of Locked On Saints is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Right now, summer sports are in full swing, so whether you're taking in some basketball under the lights, or you're taking in some golf on the green, maybe some WNBA action as well, FanDuel is the best way to make it all even more exciting. You're already caring about the action. Now it's time to get in on the action as well. Over in the WNBA, the Aces trying to create a little bit of distance in their game up against the Valkyrie, 5.5 point favorites. The Aces are a great one to get into in that Western Conference bout. So go and check it all out today. You can find it all over at FanDuel, whether you want to take a look at a same game parlay or watching your bet ride going into the 9th inning of a baseball game. FanDuel makes it super easy for you to be a part of the action. And if you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. Open up the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. Get it, Who Dat Nation. Over on the defensive side of the football, the New Orleans Saints have several newcomers that are looking to claim starting positions, and they're doing a pretty dang good job of it. Now, look, there's certain players like, Justin Reed, who step into a role that was vacated, right? And may have stepped into that role one way or another. And then maybe Tyrann Mathieu would have done something different in this defense. But Justin Reed steps into a role based on the circumstances of the team. But there's two players in particular that already look to have made their leaps into the starting lineup. And they were two of our winners from training camp. So unsurprising to see these two names here. But Davon Godchaux leading off the nose tackle list, right? Davon Godchaux, Colin Saunders, then you get to Christian Boyd, and then interestingly, Jonah Williams. But Jonah Williams, I look at obviously a little bit more as a defensive lineman than a nose tackle type, but I think he can do a little bit of, everything if you ask him to do so. And so to me, the thing that was most interesting here is that we talked about earlier, the depth charts, these unofficial depth charts are so often just like a list of seniority more than they are anything else. And that's not the case here at defensive tackle, nose tackle type, as in particular, where Davon Godchaux, who, is going into his first year with the New Orleans Saints, returning to the state of Louisiana to play, but first year with the New Orleans Saints, has left Colin Saunders, who's going into his third season with New Orleans. And so I thought that was really interesting. I thought that was something that makes sense because Davon Godchaux has been the best defensive lineman, defensive tackle for this New Orleans Saints team all throughout training camp. He's been a big time run stopper. He absolutely engulfs running backs whenever they try to run up the middle and he gets in the way. His ability to change the numbers has opened up the game of guys like Bryan Bresee, who's looked really good so far this training camp, playing that sort of 3-4 defensive end role rather than that penetrating 3-tech defensive tackle role. He's operating in a little bit more space thanks to the amount of space that Davon Godchaux can eat up from the interior, but then also the amount of space that gets challenged from those tackles with the wide 9 alignment of the edge rushers. It's all kind of coming together, but it starts in the middle, right? You build from the inside out, and we're going to the inside here and take a look at Davon Godchaux, who has clearly stepped into what feels like is going to be a starting role for him week 1. And I don't know, we'll see if we even see him during the preseason, but this one to me feels a lot like the Kelvin Banks side of things over on the offensive side too, where they were like, look, there's no mystery here, right? Kelvin Banks is a starting left tackle. Trevor Penning is a starting left guard. Taliese Fuaga is a starting right tackle. Davon Godchaux is the starting nose tackle, right? Like there's no mystery here. And so I really enjoyed seeing that. And I thought that was something that really stood out to me immediately. The other newcomer that's really stepped into his role was one of our other defensive winners from earlier in Julian Blackmon. Julian Blackmon showed up the second day of training camp and then just rose to the point to where when Jonas Sanker came to do his media availability, Justin Reed and Julian Blackmon walked him into his media availability, and they actually asked probably the first 2 minutes of questions. And one of the questions came up, what do you think of Julian Blackmon? And Jonas Sanker said, well, I hate the fact that you just showed up and it all just clicked and you're doing a great job and everything like that. And so it was a great compliment, but at the same time, it was the reality that like Jonas Sanker was the guy that everybody was talking about after Tyrann Mathieu retired. Like, oh, we'll get to see Jonas Sanker in this Brandon Staley defense and that versatility and that attacking nature and the sort of downhill nature of his game. We'll get to see all of it, blah, blah, blah. And then all of a sudden Julian Blackmon showed up and it's like, no, it's Julian Blackmon. It's Julian Blackmon and Justin Reed. Like those are the guys that are going to be out there. And so, it a lot of times, right? Jokes tell a little bit of the truth. That was one that told a little bit of the truth. I'm sure that there is a little bit of like, man, you just got here and all of a sudden, like you're just jumping in like this. But I do think that the value of the veteran experience really gets brought there. And of course, again, that long-standing desire from Brandon Staley, 5 years long to want to work with Julian Blackmon. He was a big fan of that Utah defense. I think a lot of us were back in 2020. And so now he finally gets him. And so to keep him off the field or to have him not playing in a starting role would probably seem a little strange. And so now that you got him there, you might as well get him out on the field. Everything else seems to make sense. The one thing that is really interesting is, and this is just one of those weird unofficial depth chart quirks to where you're trying to represent players in the right way, but you're also trying to play a little bit of gamesmanship, whatever it might be. Well, the Saints over at edge rusher have Cam Jordan starting at one position of edge rusher, and then the other one is Carl Granderson or Chase Young. And somebody rightfully presented the question to me, why do the Saints have both of their best starting defensive ends competing against one another for one spot? And that's not actually what's happening here. This is one of those quirky, unofficial, depth chart things. I mean, you look at Carl Granderson and Chase Young all throughout training camp, they've never taken a snap from the same side of the field. They've always bookended each other. You look back to last year, they never took a snap from the same side of the field. They very rarely swap sides of the field. One of them rushed from one side, one of them rushed from the other side. That's exactly what's going to happen here too. So those two aren't actually competing for one spot. I think this is a little bit of like treating everybody on your roster fairly, but then also maybe a little bit of gamesmanship in the process. We'll see where things go, but it's going to be Carl Granderson on one side, Chase Young on the other, with Cam Jordan kind of finding his opportunities to rotate. And then the conversation becomes, right? Is it Chris Rumph? Is it Jasheen Davis? Does Isaiah Foskey turn a corner, which we haven't seen yet? Is it Fadil Diggs? Does he leap up? Like, there's a lot of different kind of routes this all could go. And corner is exactly what we've expected so far. Kool-Aid McKinstry on one side, Isaac Yiadom on the other side, with Alontae Taylor playing in the slot. I assume that when they go base, Alontae Taylor will line up outside, but certainly when they go into those nickel sets, he'll be the one on the inside. No big surprises when it comes to special teams. We'll see what happens at punter and how that all, the trio, which will become the duo once they get to California, kind of figure out who gets the win there. But, Rashid Shaheed doing returns and Dante Pettis listed as well. All right, coming up in tomorrow's episode, I'd like to do a 53-man roster projection, so we're going to dive right into that in tomorrow's show. We appreciate you very much, as always, for making us a part of your day, part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. If you see me, please say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on your favorite social media at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.